Welcome to Inside the Corner Office, a podcast where you will be taken behind the scenes of the daily life of a CEO. I'm Thomas Buberl, CEO of AXA. In each episode of this podcast, we will delve into a specific aspect of this role. You will see that making decisions from an office is definitely not what this job is all about. For every topic, we'll be joined by a leader of a major organization. I hope you will enjoy these discussions. Tune in and take a seat at the table. We are inside the corner office. Today, I've got the great pleasure to be with Billy Hogan, CEO of one of the most recognized football clubs in the world, Liverpool FC, aka the Reds. Billy's journey is truly inspiring, rising from a commercial role to becoming the CEO of this legendary club. Since joining Liverpool in 2012, he has been at the forefront of some of the most pivotal moments in the club's recent history. Under his leadership since 2020, Liverpool not only won the Premier League, lifted the EFL Cup in 2023-24, reached the Champions League final in 2022, but also navigated the challenges of COVID-19, oversaw a major stadium expansion, and smoothly transitioned into a new era following the departure of Jürgen Klopp. What makes Billy stand out is his unique blend of a competitive, sports-driven mindset with a deeply collaborative approach. His leadership offers valuable insight that resonates far beyond the world of sport. Welcome, Billy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Do you remember the first time we met?
I've listened to a few of these, so I knew that this question was coming. Yes, actually, we were just discussing it. The first time we met was back in 2018. It was May 28th, and the reason I remember that is because actually it was after we had unfortunately lost to Real Madrid in the Champions League final. But later that next week, we had a meeting down here in Paris. This is when we first met.
Exactly. I thought you were mentioning the Taylor Swift concert when we were
that
both
was,
in
that was
the
a good
Pink
meeting.
Hats.
That was a good meeting as well.
Exactly. Exactly. So I want to explore a little bit today, and maybe let's start from the very end. The most recent big change you've seen was the leadership transition between Jürgen Klopp to Arne Slot.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So two people with very different characters, but when you look from the outside, it went very seamless.
Yeah,
Why?
I think that's a good question. I think first and foremost, the circumstances of the transition are unique within football. Typically, when a manager or head coach departs from a club, it's typically under duress, and it's typically not something that is necessarily planned in terms of a transition. And so oftentimes, it's a very compressed time frame. In our case, and in this case, Jürgen made the decision to depart, and he made the decision that he would finish the season, but that would be his final season. So the fact that he made that decision in the first half of the season, we announced it in January. It gave us, as the leadership, from ownership all the way down to ourselves and the executive team and on the football side, time to actually consider what the next steps would be. And oftentimes in football, you don't have a lot of time. So that was the first thing, which, so having the time, having had that level of communication with Jürgen, both to ownership as well as the leadership of the club, and having that time, and then ultimately having the announcement be made at the end of January gave us then the ability to sort of be public in terms of a search for a new head coach. Again, oftentimes when a manager or a coach is leaving a football club, there's work that goes on behind the scenes, but it's not necessarily public. So we had the opportunity then to be very public in that regard. It gave our team the chance, particularly on the football side, to kind of restructure. Michael Edwards came back as the CEO of FSG Football, then hired Richard Hughes as sporting director, and the team was able to look at really the landscape of available coaches, managers, a lot of data and a lot of research that was put together. Arne was at the top of that list. And a lot of that was down to the similarities in terms of the tactical ways that they play. Very different people, as you said, very different personalities, but there are a lot of similarities in terms of the way they play tactically. And so that was another benefit because it didn't mean that the entire team needed to be changed. And Arne could come in and work with the team. And obviously, that summer we really didn't make much in terms of additions in the transfer window. And Arne was able to take that team and win the Premier League. So
played extremely well.
So,
but what was your role
well
in that transition? So, I mean, you are the constant variable in it, in a way that you've seen Jürgen, you are now seeing Arne. You probably also gave him your, wisdom of what he should change, should not change. What was your role in that transition?
Well, to be very clear, I let the manager or the head coach. They're responsible for the football for sure. As the leader of the club in that sense, I was involved, but it really was more. Again, really more our football side that was looking at it from the perspective of the data and analysis around who would be the right candidate and candidates to replace Jürgen. Jürgen obviously was a phenomenal leader, a huge personality. We've seen and was at the club for 9 years. So we've seen, particularly in English football, when managers have been in a club for a long time, it becomes very, very difficult in terms of replacing them, just simply because of the kind of consolidation of decision-making and power in that leadership role. So when somebody like Jürgen leaves, it is a big change. Actually, I think we used that change to kind of reset some of the different elements within the structure so that, Arne came in as the head coach, Richard coming in as a sporting director, reformatting some of the leadership and some of the structure around the football side as well, to help actually in that transition. And it's gone very well.
Very good to know. I mean, it's not obvious because when a new leader comes, you never know what's going to happen.
No, you don't. And I think, one of the interesting things that Arne was very public about, so I don't mind saying it, he did not come in trying to be Jürgen Klopp. He's, first of all, confident enough in his own abilities, but smart enough to know that, he needed to be his own person. He's never tried to replicate anything that Jürgen did from his perspective. Obviously, as we said, tactically, there's similarities, but there are differences in terms of how they set the team up and how they play on the pitch. But, Arne has been, very, very consistent and very much his own person. I think what's interesting about the two, and while they are different in terms of their personalities, they're very similar in the sense that they're very authentic. And, what you see with Jürgen on the camera is very similar to what you see with Jürgen off the camera. And I would say the same is the case with Arne. But that's one thing that from a personality standpoint, they're both very authentic and very true to themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's a good lesson of leadership. Don't copy your predecessor.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the, I think it's, I've made this comment before, but it's an example of succession planning. And, again, in football, it's usually, at least on the football side, it typically tends to be a much shorter window in terms of that succession.
You're either being fired or you're being poached by another club.
Exactly.
And then the windows are very short.
And so now you've got to react to that issue. It's typically sort of in a bit of a crisis. But regardless, it is a lesson in that sense about trying to identify, in any organization or potentially from outside the organization, who are the right people to follow. And also, to your point, Thomas, not trying to be the person that you followed. You need to be true to yourself and true to your vision from a leadership standpoint.
So 9 years of Jürgen Klopp. What have you learned for your own leadership style, seeing what he's done, how he's done it? How has he inspired you?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about Jürgen that I always marveled at is the fact that he is a very clear and very direct communicator. Even from the first press conference, when he called himself the normal one, he has the ability to communicate directly and succinctly and clearly. Meanwhile, doing that in a second language, which I, always marveled at. So I think, one of the impressive things from a leadership standpoint that he brought was just his ability to communicate and to kind of boil down a lot of different things and issues into very specific and salient points to try and get people on the same page. And I think he does that as well as probably anybody that I've been around. The other is, and I think this is probably something that is that's a part of leadership generally, but his expectation of success and wanting to ensure that you take every opportunity to provide the right environment for people to be successful. And that's one of the things, even at the AXA Training Center, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is the fact that the team has an environment to be successful in. And that's everything from, our physios and the medical staff to our nutritionists and what happens in the kitchen and the canteen. So, that expectation of the highest level across the board, whatever your role is, to be the best at what you do, that's another thing that, he was, very demanding in that regard, but rightly so in the sense of trying to be the best of in our particular field.
It's obviously a very tense industry. And how do you avoid that the demanding doesn't go too far and ends in a burnout of players and the team? How do you find the right balance?
That's really difficult. The environment that the players are in, that the team is in, is a highly charged environment. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure, obviously. And it's only grown, I think, with the amount of media coverage and social media and everything else. I think that's something that from a medical standpoint, physio standpoint, a lot of thought goes into, particularly as the season kind of gets up and running. Having the right amount of days off, having the right amount of breaks, potentially changing up the training schedule, trying to rotate the squad, all of those things to try and take a little bit of pressure out. And even just, the other night in the Carabao Cup, you saw a big change in terms of the squad that was on the pitch, but even more so, a lot of the guys weren't even on the bench, so they got the chance that evening to have the evening off. So I think it's little things over the course of what is a very long season. Having worked in U.S. sport prior to joining Liverpool, they have long off seasons, months off. In our case, there are weeks off. Where our season ends at the end of May. And the team reports back at the beginning of July. In between that, they're either playing for their national teams or maybe getting a couple of weeks off. So it is a long, grinding, grueling schedule, and finding ways to just, take a little bit of the pressure out is something that quite a lot of thought goes into.
The other question when you look at the team is like many football clubs that have quite a few stars have a team that is dominated by the stars at the expense of a good team. You also have quite a few stars, but your stars seem to integrate very well. When I look at Mo Salah, for example, he's part of the team and not outside.
Yeah.
How do you manage this dynamic that, yes, you do have stars and you need them in the critical moments, but at the same time, they are part of the team?
Let's start with sort of the leadership. I think a tremendous amount of credit needs to go to the manager, to the coach, Jurgen in his case, Arne now. But a lot of it also is the guys in the dressing room. And, we were chatting about it earlier. I think we've had a very long line of leaders at Liverpool on the playing side, going back from when FSG became involved anyways, starting with Steven Gerrard and Jamie Carragher and the group that was kind of the leadership group at that point. The next generation coming through, which was Jordan Henderson and James Milner and Andy Robertson. And, you had another group that came through, and then Virgil van Dijk and Ali arrive and Mo arrives, and they've sort of had that leadership from Jordan and that group. And then now they're the sort of elder statesmen. They may not like that. But as the leadership group, it's their responsibility then to sort of lead the team and, frankly, to some degree, explain and show what it means to play for Liverpool. And I think there's always been a tremendous amount of respect from the team, obviously, for the club and for the supporters, and the fact that the club is bigger than any one individual. And so it's about trying to operate within what I would call the values of the club generally. And again, not just from a leadership standpoint and from the personality standpoint from the playing side, but also, in terms of the recruitment of those individuals. And a lot of work, again, from Richard and Dave Woodfine and all the, Barry Hunter, the team on the football side, Will Spearman, who runs our data and research. Ultimately, it's a team sport. And most of the times you need the team to win.
Managing a football club is often quite difficult to imagine because, we know very well how companies are managed. If you were to compare how is a football club managed versus a company, where would you say are similarities, but where do you also see big differences?
Well, I think similarities in a sense, it's not necessarily the most romantic, but, clubs now are businesses.
Exactly.
And, it is something that from our perspective, it's an incredibly competitive environment. And we are competing in the biggest football league in the world, in the Premier League, and we're fortunate to be one of the biggest clubs in the world, and so we're competing every day with not just the biggest clubs in England, but the biggest clubs across the continent. So we are constantly focused in delivering the philosophy that we operate by, which is a sustainable philosophy. We want to generate as much revenue as we possibly can, and we want to try and manage our costs so we can put as much of that into investment on the pitch. And so we focus on the areas where we have commercial growth. And then obviously the guys on the football side are focused on how they continue to improve the squad.
You need to work hand in hand because
Absolutely.
If one or the other side doesn't work, you've got a problem.
100%. And we sort of call it a virtuous circle. Hopefully the success on the pitch leads to success off the pitch and vice versa. That was kind of our philosophy when FSG acquired the club back in 2010. And it's worked out pretty well over the course of the last 15 years.
How do you align? Because somehow you need to, the message is clear, you both have to give the best, but you somehow need to align. Do you take decisions on the commercial side without talking to the football side? Do they take decisions without you? Do you coordinate? How does it work?
I think there's coordination where it needs to be. There's communication constantly. There's a lot of discussion around when the business side and the football side, when and how they meet and when they need to sync up. But I think it probably allay some fears of most of our supporters when I say that the football people are the people making the decisions as it relates to who we're signing and who we're bringing in from a transfer perspective. And likewise, on the commercial side, it's myself and our business side that are looking at what we're doing from, as an example, you mentioned in the run-in the redevelopment of Anfield and what that's meant and what that's looked like over the course of the last 10 years. So, I think hopefully one of the things that we do well is that we try and put great people into position to make decisions, and then we try and let them make those decisions. But it is a very collaborative atmosphere. It doesn't always work perfectly, but when the business side and the football side are communicating effectively, I think that's you're in your strongest position at that point. The other thing I guess I would say, and it's probably maybe slightly different from a sort of quote unquote normal business is just the results and the grind of the season, and the fact that you have, in our case, every sort of 3 or 4 days, a very public display of how the club is performing. I think that is a natural element. After a win, the mood in the office is certainly better than after a loss. But I think from our perspective, it's also trying to maintain focus on the longer term goals and not being necessarily distracted by, an individual result. And obviously, results are critical. They're key in our world. That's what we're here to do, is to win. But you also have to have that vision of, what are you trying to accomplish in the long term? And I'd say that's similar to any business. It's just the sort of the public nature of what we do that is different maybe than other businesses.
I guess your revenue in the short term is relatively inelastic because, you won't lose a supporter if you haven't played well one weekend. You won't lose the sponsor if you haven't played well. But you're right, looking at more from a long-term perspective.
Yes, from our perspective, and going back to that sort of how the business and the football side communicate and how we work together, and part of that is in sort of laying out, look, this is what our 3-5 further year plan looks like.
So you have a plan like this?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that is synced up between football and
looking at sort of where we are from a budget perspective, looking at where we are from a football perspective, and then what does that look like in terms of those decisions that are being made on the football side. Obviously, that's our biggest expense line, and rightly so. And so, you need, particularly now with financial fair play and the regulations that exist, to make sure that the right hand and the left hand are talking to each other, and that we're in the right position to think about what squad planning looks like going out many years.
I mean, a lot of businesses are complaining at the moment that doing a 3 or 5 year plan is virtually impossible because the world changes every day. Is the world of football much more stable than...
I wouldn't call it stable necessarily. I identify with that concern. I think, from our perspective, we have, if you think about the way that the business side is structured and frankly, just the way that the revenue is structured. So we get a considerable amount of our revenue comes from our media revenues, and that's whether that's the Premier League, whether that's the Champions League. So that's an element from our perspective that is out of our control. That will be a result of whatever those deals are that are done by the Premier League and by UEFA for those competitions. We obviously hope that they continue to increase, and we hope that we continue to be at the higher end of them to generate as much revenue as we can on the media side. But a lot of what we're focused on the business side is focused on controllable revenue, and the controllable revenue is all of the commercial revenue. So whether that's through our partnerships, of which AXA is a big part of that, whether that's through our merchandising business, whether that's through our match day business at Anfield, and part of the reason to expand Anfield is to grow the match day revenue as well as bring more supporters in. And so we're really focused, and what me and my team have been focused on over the course of the last decade plus is really how do we grow the controllable revenue? And then ultimately, how can you secure that revenue for many years into the future? So we've just launched a new long-term partnership with Adidas. We have thankfully a long-term partnership with AXA. So it's those revenue streams that can be insured over time that give us a little bit more ability to plan.
You mentioned earlier your shareholder, FSG, and I mean, in a company, it's relatively clear. The shareholders want dividend. They want a growing company. We see them once a year at the AGM. What does FSG want from you, and how often do they intervene or not?
I've worked for FSG for 21 years now. So I started in 2004. I was based in Boston at the time and was part of the acquisition team that worked on acquiring the club in 2010. And then I came into a full-time role working for the club in a chief commercial officer role in 2012. So I've worked for our ownership for 2+ decades.
Time.
Yeah. I would say that from an involvement standpoint, John Henry, our principal, Tom Werner's our chairman, Mike Gordon's a president of FSG. Those three are principally the three that are most involved. Mike is probably the person who is the day-to-day person from a both business and football side. And that's been the case since 2012. Mike and I have worked very closely. And sometimes we might talk 3 times a day, and other times we might not talk for a week and a half. It does vary in terms of the activity and in terms of the communication. Coming back to the question in terms of what does FSG expect, want, et cetera. And I would say this is the case across any of our properties from a team perspective, is ultimately to win. That's the purpose. We're all competitive people. Working in sports gives you a very public nature of whether or not you're winning or losing, but it's something that we're very focused on, is ultimately winning and putting the best team, whether that's on the pitch, on the field, on the ice, in front of our supporters, fans, depending on the team. Ultimately, in terms of sort of growth, it would be an expectation that a shareholder would expect some growth along with that. I think our philosophy has been that the sort of industry or the asset class, if you will, of sports is one that has tremendous growth. And if you look at the overall appreciation that you've seen for teams across certainly North American sport, but globally as well, that there's value being derived as we continue to increase our revenues, as we continue to grow as a club. And so while there isn't a dividend, it's not something, as I said before, our philosophy is to reinvest everything that we make. The owners don't take money out of the club. They put it back in, and whether that's in infrastructure or on the pitch. But ultimately, the value of Liverpool over time is obviously growing. And so at some point in the future, there may be an opportunity to see a return on that. But to be fair, in 20 plus years, FSG hasn't sold. And so, it's continued to acquire assets. And, we would describe it now as a platform company across sports.
What I found quite striking is when I visited, the ability that you have to get better from game to game and to use also data and AI to understand what to do differently. I mean, a lot of companies talk a lot about AI, but the implementation lacks. I remember when I was in this room where you had this whole team, sitting in front of screens. Tell us a little bit more how you use data and what have you done on the AI side to really benefit from this insight for your own improvement of the game.
Yeah, our philosophy going back to sort of the early days of when FSG took over Liverpool was to put more reliance on data and analytics. And I think, since 2010, you've seen most football clubs would say the same. Well, there's two things. Analytically, looking at how are we playing from a technical standpoint and how does our competition play and what we might do differently based upon what the competition does and what we might do. So game to game, obviously, sort of analysis and what that looks like. And then the other side of it, obviously, is on the recruitment side. And one of the most challenging parts of football is recruitment and ensuring that when you do make a transfer, that the transfer hopefully works out. And that doesn't always happen. And it's like any other part of business, in a sense, when you change to a new company or when you change to a new club or to a new country or new teammates, you just never know. There's a lot of variables that go into that. So trying to be as well researched and as knowledgeable about the individual and how they can fit into that environment is critical. And a lot of that is based upon the data. So the team that sits in our data and analytics is critical to the success, has been critical to the success that we've had over the course of the last 15 years. And identifying talent, which is getting harder and harder as everybody is getting better and better at data and research, but identifying talent hopefully in a way that it's earlier in their development and then bringing them in to develop within the squad. And that's been something that I think historically over the course of the last 15 years we've done really well. But the AI component of it now is helping us just to be more efficient, more effective. And you're right, everybody's talking about AI and how it impacts their business. And I'm not sure we're seeing necessarily the output of it
Not yet. It's
in
coming.
A lot of places. It's coming, but I think in the case of our data team and the research, they have been working with AI for quite some time. And actually, that's just more about efficiencies and how they're able to consume and generate more output than maybe what they might have, when you were scrolling through spreadsheets back in the day.
You mentioned recruiting and talent spotting. I mean, in companies, our rule of thumb is always, look, 80% of the talent comes from inside. We're promoting inside and 20% from outside. And we're very cautious in recruiting from outside because you never know who you get, what you get.
Yeah.
What's your philosophy? Because, I mean, you probably will not be able to follow the same rules. What's your philosophy in recruiting and putting a team together and promoting?
On the business side, I would say that's probably...
That's pretty similar.
Probably similar, particularly in the sense of people who have come through the organization, understand the organization, understand the values of the club and how we work on a day-to-day basis to try and deliver for our supporters and do that in what we would call the right way. On the football side, obviously, it's a little bit different. And so we have an academy, Alex Inglethorpe, who runs the academy, and they've done a fantastic job of delivering young talent into the first team, but it is an 80% of the first team. So the transfer market is a reality of top clubs, and that's something that we are involved in more so sometimes than others. But there's always a focus on how can you develop young talent in the club and bring it through. And we've historically been very successful at doing that. It's great when you can bring a local, young lad through into the first team. And at the same time, commercially, it's actually very beneficial because obviously you're not paying a transfer fee for that individual. So it's good on both sides of the ledger, whether that's been some of the younger players that have come through more recently or going back to, Trent, who came through, Curtis, all the way back to Steven and Jamie and, those guys in that generation. So there is a history of developing talent from the academy. But coming back to sort of the business side, we would focus on trying to promote from within. I think all the reasons why you mentioned in terms of understanding the business, but I think it also sends the right message in terms of there's a growth opportunity in the organization. And if people, look, it happens sometimes. People need to leave to grow, but we would hope that we can find ways for people to move up within a pathway in the club if possible, always.
You spoke about lads. There is also women football that is, seeing a lot of popularity now.
Absolutely.
Certainly with the recent big events in Europe. What's your vision on women football, and what are you doing really to promote it and to make it an equal reality? Yeah,
when I came into the CEO role in September of 2020, I joined the board of the women's team as well at that time. Susan Black, my colleague who's since left the club, but she, myself, and Mike Gordon were sort of the three on the board. And at the time, the team had actually been relegated, and so we were in the championship in the women's side of the sport. And really, the focus was on how do we restructure and how do we get ourselves back into the Women's Super League, which we have since done, and then obviously sort of consolidate and then compete. And I will take a moment to recognize we had our head coach, our manager, Matt Beard, passed away recently, who was actually the coach of the team that was promoted. So I just want to recognize Matt and that loss. From the overview, from the women's perspective, we think there's huge growth opportunity. I think it's unfair sometimes the way that people consistently compare the women's game to the men's game, because, as I've said oftentimes, the men's game has had 100+ years of investment. The women's game has had, a decade. We need to be patient and we need to build the sport, but I absolutely think that there's a tremendous opportunity there. We've invested, we bought back what was previously our men's training ground, AXA Melwood, to now be the training ground for the women. So we have one of the best training grounds in the WSL. We've got a great new leadership team that's in place on the women's side. And so I think from our perspective, we see in, the next 5, 10, 15 years, tremendous growth within the women's game. And we're starting from a really solid perspective because, a lot of the teams are obviously have big men's teams. And so, whether it's Liverpool or Chelsea or Man City, there's big brands behind those teams. And so I think that's unique if you're thinking about a small league that's just starting. It has that inertia behind it. So, we are very, very positive, very bullish about the women's game going forward.
You mentioned earlier values, and when I think about the games that I have seen, often the most moving moment is not when you win or when you lose. It's the moment when the song "You Never Walk Alone" comes.
Yes. Yeah.
What does this song and the motto symbolize for you, for the club, for the players, for your fans, and how does it keep the club together? In good and also difficult times.
Yeah, I think it's been described as our anthem, which I think is entirely appropriate. It is a hair-raising goosebump experience when you're at Anfield and you hear our supporters singing it. I sing along with them. I think there are so many elements of the message of "You'll never walk alone." I mean, just simply saying "You'll never walk alone," it is that sort of proverbial arm around the shoulder. And I think that's the way that the club, the supporters, the city thinks and behaves. And, whether that, as you said, through good times or through tragedy, whether it's Hillsborough or others, there has always been this thread of compassion, of battling through what can be storms, what can be difficult times, and at the same time knowing that as you continue on that journey, A, you're not alone, and B, that the sun will come out again, and that there will
certainly
be.
Liverpool, you need to have that hope because
yes, we do. Yeah, we do have a lot of rain in Liverpool. That's true. But no, but it is so poignant and I think resonant with the club, with the city, with the supporters. You're right. It's one of the more unique experiences in sport, standing in Anfield and hearing it. Unique because it's so authentic. It's so real. And I think it really is something that runs through the entire supporter base and certainly the club and the players. And, we all feel that. I don't think you can help but feel it.
No, look, when I go back to when we had our first contact, that was the thing that drew me to Liverpool.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's very related to what we think at AXA and what we do at AXA, and I think there's very strong purpose. You can feel it as you walk in the building.
Yes.
It's amazing. Talking about globalization, what's quite interesting, I mean, obviously you are an iconic club in the UK. As soon as you go to the continent in Europe, people know you, but the excitement is limited. If you then go to Asia, like in Indonesia, people are way beyond excited.
Yeah.
Why is Asia, your place to be? What
I would say in Europe they're still excited when we're there, but maybe not quite as much. Yes, yeah. It is incredible. I've had the honor and good fortune to work for the club full time since 2012, and have spent a lot of time in Asia, both for work as well as for our preseason tours, which are always an incredible opportunity. And we're just in Hong Kong and in Tokyo and Yokohama this past summer. The support out there is incredible.
And why is that the case?
I think we were fortunate in one sense as sort of football, particularly at the time the first division, but the Premier League was sort of becoming more global. Liverpool was at the top of the table oftentimes. And so particularly from a TV perspective, when maybe you had one game a week that would be broadcast, Liverpool was often the team that was being broadcast. And so because we were successful and because it was being broadcast on a more global basis, there was an opportunity to develop that fan base. And so, when you go back to Kenny Dalglish and Ian Rush and that generation, they really helped to globalize the team. And even now, when you go to Asia, you see the fathers and mothers with their kids. So it's generational in that sense. But it's always been truly incredible, the global nature of the football club. I get texts from, friends that I grew up with who are in some random city, either in the U.S. or around the world. There's a Liverpool flag outside a pub, or somebody's got a Liverpool hat on. It is, in any corner of the world, you can find Liverpool fans. It's fantastic.
One last question before we have to finish. You are looking back onto a long career within FSG but now also at Liverpool. What are your own learnings in terms of leadership, and what would you like the next generation that is coming up to consider when they think about their own leadership development? What's your advice to them?
Look, I've been very fortunate in my career. I certainly wouldn't have predicted that I would be the CEO of one of the biggest football clubs in the world. But I think that, while that track wasn't linear, a lot of what I think has been successful for me has been about relationships. And ultimately, that's internal relationships within the organization that you work in, and external relationships with the stakeholders that you need to work with outside your organization. And that comes from communication and collaboration and trying to, it sounds trite maybe, but trying to treat people the right way. And, I've been working with a group of people at FSG for 21 years, and we're all still very close. And, we've had a lot of fun doing what we've done, and it's been successful for the most part across the board. But that's all come from, that constant communication, constant collaboration. I think from a leadership standpoint, the most important thing is being clear about what the vision is and about what you all are trying to accomplish. And, we talked a lot about sort of football and business, but at the end of the day, we are one club. We just had a town hall 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about, our sort of plan on a page or our strategy at the club. And I want everyone to understand exactly how they fit in to helping us win trophies. And that's the most important thing. You have a vision, you have communication, and then ultimately people feel like they're a part of a team.
Which again goes back to the relationship point.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Billy, thank you so much.
Thomas,
Very
great
insightful.
to be with you.
Great to have you in Paris. Thank you.